Welcome, friends. My name is Lisa. I'm one of your facilitators tonight. We'll do introductions in a few moments, but we wanted to start tonight's call similar to how we did last week by inviting us all to bring our bodies present. And so for the first minute of gathering, I invite you just to move your body in whatever way it needs to move. That might be big movements, that might be little movements. I was hammering all morning, so my shoulders are really, really tense and tight. And as you're doing that, to breathe deeply and notice where your breath is going, notice where it might feel stuck, um, and bring some consciousness to expanding your breath in a way that feels a little bit bigger than you have been breathing, but it doesn't feel hard or awkward or strained. So we're just going to take a few minutes. We're going to breathe into our bodies, breathe into our beings. If you are sitting or standing and it's easy for you to put your feet flat on the floor, to sit on the edge of your chair for a moment and just get your spine and body in alignment, whatever way that works for you. And take some breaths. I like to put my hand over my heart and one over my belly as a way of really connecting with my body, feeling my breath expand in both my rib cage and my belly. And so as we take these next few breaths, just do a little scan of your body where there is ease and motion, where there might be tightness or a little bit of disconnection, and to be gentle with yourself. Take a few breaths, just notice what you're feeling. Could be an emotional feeling, could be a physical feeling, could be a combination of the two. So we're breathing deeply, getting grounded in our bodies in whatever way works for us. Noticing and checking in with where we are and how we're doing right now. And whatever we're feeling is okay. Feelings aren't right or wrong, good or bad. They simply are, and they're information for us. So maybe with your next breath, take a moment of gratitude for your body, for sharing information with you, for supporting you, for being present with you. The next thing I invite you to do, and again, we can't see you, so do what works for you, whatever way, is to take your hands and rub them together and build up some energy, and then just place your hands wherever you need that. So we'll offer a little bit of care and energy to whatever part of your body needs a little care or energy right now. We're still breathing deeply. You can keep your feet flat on the floor. Being present, being grounded, inviting spirit to be with us, bringing our full attention here. And the last thing I'm going to invite us to do, I learned from a friend this week that many of us are missing a lot of hugs that we get in life, that because of the pandemic we can't hug. And so what I learned is that if you take your arms and put them on your shoulders and then rub them down your arms a few times, it's not the same as a hug, but it triggers some of the same things in our body of a sense of connection, security, and soothing. So I invite you to do that, to have care for yourself, care for your body. And on our final breath in, let's just hold care and gratitude for everyone who is showing up here tonight. We are more than 400 strong right now, and I know there are many other people who will be joining us in the next few minutes. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for taking the time to get grounded and be with yourself and with us. Welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. Welcome, everybody. Great to see you here again. Great to be entering the space fully present with our bodies. I'm grateful to see you all.
Right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back. I think we're at a little over 400 so far. This is great. And before we get into the goals and agenda, I'd like to invite all of us who have been putting this together to introduce themselves again. saying who we are and why we're here. And I can start with that. My name is Mila Hamilton. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm on Dakota and Anishinaabe land. I'm a Quaker. I attend Twin Cities Friends meeting. I am a member of Northern Yearly meeting, and I'm on various committees with AFSC, American Friends Service Committee. I'm here because I know that this work is necessary for us white folks to meet this moment right now. And personally, I do this work because I'm adamant about Black power and liberation for Black people, as well as Indigenous and folks of color. And because I recognize that their liberation is linked to mine and my ancestors and my descendants. Thank you.
Hi friends, I'm Lisa Graustein. I live in Boston and attend Beacon Hill meeting and Three Rivers meeting, and my home in both those meetings are on Massachusetts and Wampanoag land. I am really excited to be here with you all again, and similar to Mila, I am here doing this work because I understand it to be the work of Quakerism, that if we are to see that of God in everyone and realize God's realm on earth, this is the work we have to be doing. I also do this because my ancestors have been colonizing this land since the 1620s, and my family has been integral in creating many of the institutions that created and perpetuate white supremacy. And so my understanding of this work is part of how I repair my family's lineage and our part and role in this. And I'm grateful to be doing this with you all tonight. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lucy Duncan. I live in Philadelphia. I'm on Lenni Lenape land. That was some of the original land colonized by Quakers, obviously. And I'm really grateful to be here with you. And Lisa and Mila have spoken a lot about my commitment. I believe that our liberation is bound up together. That releasing Black power, supporting Indigenous liberation is part of our work, and also that we have, as white people, have a lot of healing work to do, and as Lisa said, repair work for the legacy of our own colonization. I have ancestors that came over in the Mayflower, so we've been colonizing. My family's been colonizing this land for a long time, and the connections of the harm that we've done, that if during my life I can do some repair for that, that's what I'm here for. And I'm grateful to see you all. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shanae Herbert. I am the daughter of Paula Herbert and Kenneth Herbert, the granddaughter of Ethel Jackson and Paul Robinson, and Aveda Taylor and Cliff Herbert. We are originally from New York, but I live here in Minneapolis, and I do anti-racist organizing with young folks and restorative practice in the city of St. Paul and all around Minneapolis. And I joined this conversation because I work for AFSC, and I want to see white people get this work right. You all, the content of this training is so relevant to today, but to your real lives, and all of this information and your learning will impact, right, my people. And so I think it's really important that we are on this call as observers of Lucy and Mila and Lisa, to hold them accountable, because that is important in anti-racist organizing, and understanding race and racism is being held accountable to the people that is most impacted. And so I'm glad to join the call. Although it takes lots of energy to hear the stories, I think it's definitely worth it. And so that's why I'm on today, and I'm grateful.
Hi everyone, I'm Sharon Goins Bradley, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the daughter of Bert and Connie Goins, the spouse of Mary Ann, the mother of Cam, And I'm originally from a small town in Michigan. I've been living in Minneapolis for over 30 years. And I currently work for the American Friends Service Committee. I'm the interim regional director for the Midwest region. I've been with AFSC about 7 years. And I'm here because this is a life and death issue. And I'm sick of the death, to be honest with you. I'm sick of the ways that when I moved to Minnesota over 30 years ago was really when my racial justice advocacy began, because of the huge disparities in our state for people of color. There's no need for that. So I'm happy and grateful to be here. Like Shanae, I'm here as an supporter and advisor to Lisa, Lucy, and Mila, and will be off camera for most of our time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all. And yes, special thank you to Shanae and Sharon for being here. I really, really appreciate it, knowing that all that you have going on in the community currently right now. That means a lot that you're here. I'm actually going to share a little slide for the goals for our session, because we found that it was probably more helpful than going in the chat, just because it flies by in the chat. So I'm going to share that real quick. Just so the goals for the session are to gain deeper understanding of how to listen to Black, Indigenous people of color in a embodied way, following up from the last session. So we'll start out with that. And then to understand how to begin to form a relationship on the way to accompanying BIPOC leadership, to create a list of empathetic principled accompaniment, or attributes of empathetic principled accompaniment, and to understand what performative accompaniment looks like, and how not to slide into it. And then also investigating what it means to follow companionship while standing firmly in oneself, while practicing individual sovereignty, showing up maturely, and then being a co-conspirator and accomplice for Black liberation and white supremacy. And so for the agenda tonight, we're going to break it into that Lisa's going to be sharing for about 10 minutes on kind of bridging between the last session. And then I'll be sharing about listening to BIPOC leadership for about 15 minutes, and then we'll do a body break. And then from there, Lucy will cover accompaniment with BIPOC leadership for about 15 minutes. We'll do a little body break again. Lucy will come back and continue on accompaniment. We'll then have some time at the end for reflection and questions, and followed by a review of homework and small groups, so we can get actually like a little bit of a better understanding of what that will look like in the coming next weeks. And then we will end with sharing a poem and some closing worship. And from that, I will turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Mila. So as Mila said, I'm going to talk a little bit about connecting last week's session to this week's session. And the way I'm going to do that is talk about the video that we saw last week, where Sonia Renee Taylor was responding to some social media that was going on about a call she had put out for those of us who are white to put our bodies on the line more. And a lot of people on this call had a lot of reactions to that video, both in the chat and after the fact with us. So a lot of people appreciated hearing it. 3 reactions that came up a lot that I want to talk about a little bit was, one, at one point she basically said, you know, if you're not doing this, you're no better than Dylan Roof. And a lot of folks on the call kind of were like, I'm not Dylan Roof. I'm not someone who goes in and shoots up a church. What's going on there? So we're going to unpack that a little bit. Different ways that friends were expressing how they were resistant to what she was sharing and talking about. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then this notion of getting triggered by things, or when we, particularly as Quakers, and I know there are people who are not Quakers on the call, but I imagine there might be some parallels, tend to bring up our own experiences of victimhood when we're listening to a video like that. And so those are 3 things we want to look at and just talk a little bit about not as right or wrong, but as a practice of noticing, of being aware of how things are moving us. And I really appreciate everyone who shared those comments and reactions, because now we can talk about them and unpack them a little bit. So I'll share that the first time I watched that video, and she said, "You're no better than Dylan Roof," I had a strong reaction. I love Sonia Renee Taylor's work. I have been really positively influenced by her. And so I was coming to the video of like, cool, I'm going to learn something from this woman I respect. And when she said that, I had this moment of like, well, of course that's not me. And I wanted to push back on that. And what I have learned from myself the hard way over the years is that every time I say that's not me, or I want to push back, I need to look at where that is. I need to look at what that's coming from. I need to look at what that's about. Because for me, what that's often about is I heard some truth spoken that I don't want to look at. Now, I have never shot anybody, but if I think of, are there times in my life where I have sat in a community of Black people, other folks of color, and acted as if I were fully on their side and had their backs. And when push came to shove, whether it was in a staff meeting, whether it was around a political issue or a movement issue, did I not fully show up? I can say yes, I did not fully have their backs. That has happened many, many times. And I'm not proud of those moments, but they are real and they are true. And in each of those moments, I was privileging my own comfort and my own sense of safety and well-being over what was being asked of me by my friends and colleagues. And so my reaction to her saying, "You're no better than Dylan Roof," first is to say, no, that's not me. I don't have anything to do with that. But what I know I need to do is go underneath that to how am I like Dylan Roof? What is the invitation for me to look at? What is the places and times when I have not been supportive, when I have made choices that have prioritized my own comfort over Black, Indigenous people of color's safety and what they need? When are times when I have acted like I'm there for real, but really I'm invested in being seen as good? Because those things are real. And part of that discernment for me in asking that question and doing that noticing is paying attention to my body and paying attention to how I know shame and guilt show up in my body, which is like a crackly cold sweat kind of electric energy in my center and my core. And that I know is a sign of resistance in me because I don't like that feeling and I don't like what it's going to bring up in me. And so I tend to want to do what Mila talked about last week of bypass that. I want to do any behavior that's going to get me out of that feeling. And what I've learned I need to do in those moments is literally take a deep breath and lean into the discomfort of it so I can hear what is the truth that's being spoken. And I want to offer here a way that I have learned to do that as a process that we're going to talk about and look at tonight. And so the first piece is I have to notice how my resistance shows up, and I have to notice what it looks like, and I have to notice what are the behaviors I instantly want to do to not feel that discomfort anymore. And that's a constant practice of noticing. And that's why we start with embodiment, that resistance shows up in my body, that before my brain is saying no, some part of me is feeling discomfort, which causes my brain to say no. The next thing I need to do here in the orange square is I need to listen and feel for the truth and for the ask. Sonia Renee Taylor was saying a lot of truthful things, and there was a strong ask directed at white people in that. And when I get caught up in how I'm feeling about the way she's saying the truth or the way she's saying the ask, I'm not listening for the truth or the ask. When I can notice how the way she's talking is impacting me, but put my energy on how I'm listening and feeling for the truth and the ask, I can hear it much more clearly. The next thing I need to do is remember that my idea of support may not be someone else's idea of support. So instead of saying, well, this is what I would want, is going back to what is the ask? What am I hearing someone tell me they want? And if I'm not sure, check, would it be supportive to? Does this feel supportive? And then receive the feedback of yes or no, or what I might need to change. When I'm then offering that support, that engagement, that allyship, that accompliceship, that co-conspiratorship, I constantly have to be checking, is this authentic and responsive to the ask? Or am I really invested in being performative and showing up as a good white person, right? And one of those cues is like, oh, let me post about this. Let me show other people that I'm doing this. The minute I start to think that is a moment I have to check what I'm doing. The minute that I start to think, what are these people thinking of me doing this thing that I have signed up for? I need to pause and check, because now my investment in is not what was the ask and what is the other person's idea of support. It has moved back into what is it that I want to look good doing, right? And so that's a real pause moment and a point of recalibration. And then the final piece is, none of this is one shot. None of this is short term. This is about all of us who are white taking the time to build relationships, be it with individuals or with organizations that are led, directed by, run by, in the service of Black, Indigenous people of color, and that we show up vulnerable. We show up in those relationships with mutuality, not you are somehow my token whatever, not you are my person I get to practice my stuff on, but what is it you want from me in the relationship, and how do I bring my full self to the relationship? That we're honest, and that when it is with a person versus an organization, we are doing that it's based on the person. Again, it's not based on how I want to look or be perceived or seen, but based on how is this person asking me to show up in relationship with them. And how can I be vulnerable in that? How can I be honest in that? How can I be fully present? So this is also a way that when I feel myself getting triggered and wanting to say, oh no, but I'm a queer person who somebody tried to kill one time, I understand this fully, where I have to notice, how is that some piece of my resistance about how I want to be seen or understood? Where am I needing to bring up my experiences because they're either valuable to our relationship or because they're about how I want you to be seen? And where am I listening for what's the truth I'm being called into? So as we move through tonight, what we're going to be asking you to continue to do is to stay with the embodiment that we worked on last week, to notice when that resistance shows up in us, and to not say, oh, shame, bad, let me push it down. But where there's resistance, there's information. And where there's information, there can be motion. That we notice that resistance, but we also listen and feel for the truth in the ask. We listen for how we're being called to support, and we pay attention to, are we being fully responsive and authentic in that support? Or do we have aspects of being performative or being seen as the good white person? And that's a moment for pause and recalibration and checking back in. And then the long-term practice is how we show up fully in our relationships, so that those are real and true relationships. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time. So I invite you to just take a breath, to take in what is that spoke to you, to notice what of that you said, oh no, Lisa, I totally disagree with you, or I have some resistance to that, or I disagree. There's some questions popping up in the chat about what if we feel strongly that the truth isn't, and we'll get to that more later in this evening, right? And sometimes it's a little t truth, sometimes it's a big T truth. And there is that discernment between truth and where we are, but we really want to do the practice of where is the resistance coming from, and how can that give us more information and learning in those moments. And so this is stuff we're going to be practicing this evening and working through more. And we're going to keep track of your questions and also hopefully have some time at the end for those questions. So thank you. Let me pass this over back to Mila now.
Cool. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciated that. That was a good learning moment for me. So before I start again, I just want to acknowledge again that when I say we, I'm referring to people that identify as white. So we've invited you here in a way to understand how to better accompany Black, Indigenous folks of color in leadership, right? And really knowing how to listen. And as a white person, this is foundational to that relationship. And I understand that, like, while this sounds really basic, the whole learning to listen, the practice of embodied listening is an ongoing process. It is continuous. It is literally something I work on in every day, in every interaction that I have with BIPOC folks. And that is because our culture of whiteness, and we talked about this a little bit last time, but it teaches us to not listen, honor, or believe BIPOC folks, because when we do, it exposes the lies that construct our identity and our way of being. So this thing of listening is a constant unlearning process. So I want to go over a few points that kind of show up for us as white folks around listening, and kind of what get in the way of us being able to do this well. And I appreciate what Lisa said. It's like, it's not like, this is something that we have been indoctrinated into over the course of our lives, right? And so the first is a sense of internalized superiority. And so when we're in conversation, you know, because from the time we were small, we have been taught to feel a sense of superiority towards BIPOC folks. So when we are in conversation, we will often show up in a way that, you know, we feel that we need to challenge, question, interrupt, or attempt to teach or fix what they're sharing with us or others, because we consciously or unconsciously are holding a belief that we know better. In Quaker spaces, I feel like this often looks like us showing up in political actions with the assumption that we know how to do this, and fail to recognize that BIPOC folks have been doing this literally every day of their lives for the last 400 years, and that the power and the answers that they need are already in the room with them. Another aspect that I feel like gets caught up is our maintenance of goodness. And we did talk about this in the last session. But it's essentially where BIPOC truths threaten our sense of goodness and we push back. And that's often by asking a lot of questions, challenging, or just straight up leaving the conversation. And then there's the anti-racist resume, or I'm not racist resume, which is when we tell BIPOC in so many ways that we aren't racist. And it's really a thing of like that we need to prove that we're good in that moment. And it actually has the opposite effect, because what we're doing is trying to distance ourselves from the reality of ourselves as white people. And that is like inherent in our identity is racism and being racist. And then lastly, there's respectability politics. And I put the asterisks because my experiences in white liberal spaces, that is heavy with this one. And so respectability politics are basically our validation as white folks and support of Black leadership or BIPOC leadership that keeps us feeling comfortable. So they don't really challenge or disrupt the ways in which we collude with white supremacy. This means we will listen to BIPOC leadership that checks the boxes of white social cultural norms, which are like language, education, employment, dress, hair, etc. And like a classic example of this is actually how we still talk about Martin Luther King Jr. Versus Malcolm X to this day. And like respectability politics really clouds how we can hold the humanity and the power for either of those men. So essentially what I'm saying here is that when you show up, you are going to have to be willing to meet BIPOC leadership in whatever form that comes in. You know, folks may be upset. They may be from different class backgrounds than you. They may use language that you are not comfortable with or that you do not understand. And you're going to have to move past your resistance to hear what they are saying and follow their leadership. So while holding what I just shared, I want to actually invite you to start listening to BIPOC from a place of clearness, which if you're a Quaker, you may be familiar with this. And for everyone else, it means that when I am listening, I'm listening for the truth the person is speaking. And I'm listening to understand with greater clarity in a way that centers that person and their experience and not my own. For me, listening with clearness is like really a commitment that I make with myself, that I will be open and receive to what is being said. and that is really more a practice of listening with my heart than with my head. Can you hear my dog snoring? Sorry. So now I'm actually going to invite you to test that process of listening in clearness. And so I'm going to share a video with you of Miss Kimberly Jones. This video went viral shortly after the murder of George Floyd and the uprising here in Minneapolis. And I'm going to invite you to test this process of clearness with me. So before we start the video, and just as a guiding for it, I want you to just take a moment to center yourself. And when the video starts, practice listening for her truths. And also be mindful in that of how you are feeling and witness your points of resistance. Just notice them, like we talked about 2 weeks ago now, to like not overly attach to your resistance, but notice where it comes up.
So I've been seeing a lot of things talking of the people making commentary. Interestingly enough, the ones I've noticed that have been making the commentary are wealthy Black people making the commentary about we should not be rioting, we should not be looting, we should not be tearing up our own communities. And then there's been an argument of the other side of we should be hitting them in the pocket. We should be focusing on the blackout days where we don't spend money. But, you know, I feel like we should do both. And I feel like I support both. And I'll tell you why I support both. I support both because when you have a civil unrest like this, there are three types of people in the streets. There are the protesters, there are the rioters, and there are the looters. The protesters are there because they actually care about what is happening in the community. They want to raise their voices, and they are there strictly to protest. You have the rioters who are angry, who are anarchists, who really just want to fuck shit up, and that's what they're going to do regardless. And then you have the looters. And the looters almost exclusively are just there to do that, to loot. Now, people are like, well, what did you gain? Well, what did you get from looting? I think that as long as we're focusing on the what, we're not focusing on the why. And that's my issue with that. As long as we're focusing on what they're doing, we're not focusing on why they're doing. And some people are like, well, those aren't people who are legitimately angry about what's happening. Those are people who just want to get stuff. Okay, well then, let's go with that. Let's say that's what it is. Let's ask ourselves why in this country in 2020, the financial gap between poor Blacks and the rest of the world is at such a distance that people feel like their only hope and only opportunity to get some of the things that we flaunt and flash in front of them all the time is to walk through a broken glass window and get it. That they are so hopeless that getting that necklace, getting that TV, getting that change, getting that bed, getting that phone, whatever it is that they're going to get, is that in that moment when the riots happen and that phone, whatever it is that they're going to get, is that in that moment when the riots happen and if they present an opportunity of looting, that's their only opportunity to get it. We need to be questioning that why. Why are people that poor? Why are people that broke? Why are people that food insecure, that clothing insecure, that they feel like their only shot, that they are shooting their shot by walking through a broken glass window to get what they need. And then people want to talk about, well, there's plenty of people who pulled themselves up out of bootstraps and got it on their own. Why can't they do that? Let me explain to you something about economics in America. And I'm so glad that as a child, I got an opportunity to spend time at Push where they taught me this, is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that Black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Do you understand that? That's what we came to do. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Now, if I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money, I didn't allow you to have anything on the board, I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa, that was Rosewood. Those are places where we built Black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're going to catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct? But what if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, oh, you're an equal opportunity hire. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood, how can you win? How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. And if the social contract is broken, why the fuck do I give a shit about burning the fucking Football Hall of Fame, about burning a fucking Target? You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give a fuck. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, so fuck your Target. Fuck your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this bitch to the ground. And it still wouldn't be enough. And they are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
All right. So first off, thank you for listening. And now I'd just like you to take a minute to write down first what were some of the truths that you heard, and then write down a few points of resistance that you had. And these can be sensations, but also what actually triggered you. I'll give you just a minute to do that.
Mila, are you asking people to write that in the chat or to write that on their own?
I'm going to actually ask them to write it on their own, both of those things first. Thank you for asking that clarifying question. All right, and now if you're willing to share, if you can just post or drop the truths that you noticed into the chat. And Lisa is going to read some of those back to us.
It isn't ours. There is no way to win. Lack of BIPOC ownership of their neighborhoods. Equality is sought, but revenge would be a natural consequence. She is right in every way, and her speech makes me have tears and rage at the unjust system. Whites are hypocritical about violence. The game is rigged.
Mm,
We don't own any of this. The contract is broken.
mm,
We are lucky that Black people want equality, not revenge.
yes.
Righteous anger, unfairness of the system. The game is fixed or rigged.
Yes.
We broke the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you burn your community? It's not ours. We ignore the history that's uncomfortable. Claim
Yes.
monopoly for your opponent.
Mm,
They already have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and we took it away again. Our wealth is stolen.
yes. These are all great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Those who are supposed to protect us are killing us.
Mm,
And there's 99 more that we're not going to have time.
wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those. And I also feel like it's important for me to share a truth that I heard, and a point of resistance for y'all. Because I'm superhuman in this process too. But I also just want to take a second to talk about this video. It came out at a time, like when things were really jumping off in Minneapolis. And I was having a lot of conversations with white elders around what was happening. With the rioting and the looting that was happening here. And I was getting really frustrated because I was continuing to run into this response of the what, and refusing to sit with the why. And like I remember listening to this video, and I cried so hard because it was so important. She worded this so well in terms of explaining what was happening here. And so I'm so grateful to her that she put this up, and that this was shared with us. So the truth that I heard was that there are many ways to respond to this, emotional and physical, and that given the harm that has been caused, and for the length of time, like all of these forms are valid. A point of resistance that came up for me, was her saying, like, Black folks don't own anything. And my response was, or my resistance came up to that thinking like, oh man, there's going to be 500 white people listening to this, and here she is potentially reinforcing this particular stereotype. And so in my mind, like, I wanted to fix that or explain it in a way that I felt was right, instead of just hearing it, and listening to her, and honoring her. Yeah, so I want to just thank you for moving through this with us. And I want to acknowledge again that being able to actually listen and hold space, hold space for truth telling. And that is the first step in a restorative process, right? And I know that hearing truth can be uncomfortable, but know that the discomfort and the resistance that you feel is really an invitation to know yourself better and do better in relationship with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So with that, I ask you to hold on to what you actually wrote down as your points of resistance, and use them to reflect on and learn from, because they will serve as very powerful teachers in this work.
So as we move into the accompaniment reflections, I wanted to mention the pre-work, which I read almost all of those responses that came before tonight. There were a lot of them. And thank you for telling your stories. And I wanted you all to consider what support looks like, to consider efforts of your own to show up for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and create receptivity to learning more tonight. And we had in mind sharing some of your stories tonight, but it felt overly vulnerable to ask you to do so. And you'll have chances in the small groups to share some of that. And we shifted the agenda a bit tonight, which I'm going to talk about. But the pre-work was one piece in preparation for this evening. And I'm really grateful that so many of you did it. And I just wanted to say that some of the work that we give for homework or pre-work is so that we can keep teaching, even if we're not going to cover it in the core sessions. And then we're very mindfully trying to focus what we do in these sessions as well. So I want to say that the process of developing the session for tonight was a journey for me. I've been leading an accompaniment workshop for several years, and as we were preparing for this, I'm like, I got this. But when we were reviewing the agenda with Shanae and Sharon, their feedback was that we need to challenge you all more, that the workshop I've done all this time starts from a frame that folks can look at their own experience of being supported and then adjust that for accompanying across racial lines. And that while our individual experiences of being supportive can give us a bodily sense of what that feels like, it's not enough. It is not enough to think we know what support feels like and can apply that to walking with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We have to grapple first with our disconnection in order to be able to be in true relationship. And just like we have been talking about, listening, being able to really listen and receive is such an important first step, and we have to learn how to do it and to get past our resistance. And what Sharon and Shanae said was white folks need first to listen to Black folks in the way that they choose to speak, not all prettied up for white folks with the rage and the authentic truth. They need to notice their resistance to hearing these truths and work to push through that resistance. White folks needs to be vulnerable themselves and show up in real relationship, not that a relationship that is about performing allyship or doing good, but foundationally about having a human authentic connection. In many of the stories that you all wrote about supporting across differences in social location, you told stories about helping rather than leaning into relationship. And these relationships starts with listening, as we've been practicing, and that starts with knowing oneself, and that starts with understanding all the ways whiteness keeps us as white people from connecting bodily with our own selves and with each other. It starts, as we just demonstrated, with seeing where our resistance lies and working through that. And I went through a process to get clear on what I would do tonight. I felt like what I knew, I did not know. That I'm a bit of an imposter, that I need to look more deeply at what I am up to and why. I wanted to defend the workshop I've been leading and assert that I know what I'm saying and teaching. And in these interactions with Shanae and Sharon, I thought, wow, I really am a beginner. And this is the truth. While the accompaniment workshop I've been leading might have some real moments of insight in it, I have been leading it in such a way that it is more palatable to white folks and have not been willing to challenge folks to look more deeply, to grapple with how whiteness screws up our ability to authentically connect. And in that way, it does not serve its purpose to challenge white folks to show up in a way that truly disrupts the systems of white body supremacy. The truth is that we as white people are beginners, and the difference lies in being willing to let oneself learn, to be vulnerable and not know, to lean into growth over a sense of needing to feel competent. We will lose our sense of being competent as we walk more deeply into this work. We will be destabilized and need to sit deeply with discomfort in order to grow. And we don't arrive. I have been working on this stuff with intention for 15 years. I've been learning and leaning into showing up imperfectly and in human ways, and I am still beginning. That doesn't mean I haven't grown. And being willing to lean into all the ways I do not know is the beginning of shifting into the kind of orientation that could be helpful for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. You will make mistakes, big ones. You will lose people because your mistake is the 80th one they have experienced from a white person. You will need to take a breath and commit to not make that mistake again. And it is incredibly important to stay in it and show up the next time, again and again and again. To keep learning and growing and deepening our commitment, because this is how we undo the shit white people have built. The structures that cage Black and brown bodies and kill Black and brown bodies, but that also enclose white hearts. This is not work for the faint, but is how we learn to be human again. And what you think you know at any moment, you may need to discard tomorrow. It is really critical to comprehend the depth of the importance of the shift in me, in you, in us as white folks. The consequence of not doing this work are the continued deaths and massive oppression of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Our work together is consequential, and understanding the role of continued resistance to showing up in empathetic and undefended ways plays in continued oppression as well. Recognizing that defending our identity as good white people is collusion in and of itself. What if in 2012, when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, the same number of white folks were in the streets then, showing up with humility and in real relationship? What if in 2014, when Mike Brown was murdered, white folks were showing up in authentic relationship? What if there was many white people opposing Clinton and Biden's 1994 crime bill that escalated mass incarceration? What if this group of 500 of you showed up in principled, empathetic ways supporting the goals of Black Lives Matter right now? What might change? What could change? Now is the time to do the inner and outer work to really show up for this, all of us. So we're gonna, I'm gonna take a breath. I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna go back to Lisa's slide. So I wanna look at this again and the things that Lisa talked to you about. Notice how that's showing up in this example that we're gonna show. That's a real, an example of principled and authentic and empathetic allyship. So again, notice how your resistance shows up. And notice how the resistance of the person who's doing the accompaniment shows up. Listen and feel for the truth of the ask. Recognize that your idea of support may not be your idea of my idea of support may not be the support that's needed, and reflect on how this person was supporting in the way that was needed. Think about how this person is authentic and responsive and not performative. And really think about how this is built on real relationships that are vulnerable, mutual, honest, and person-based relationships. So I'm going to show you a video. This is from Cracking the Codes, which is a film that was made a couple years ago that's really powerful. And this is Joy DeGruy, who is the author of she is the author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. If you haven't read it, it's an amazing and powerful book. And she is, this is a story that she tells in the context of Cracking the Codes. And we've talked about like making sure people are remunerated for the support they give. And I do own the the version of the video and have supported this project. But it is online, and we'll send you the link as well.
My sister-in-law, who's half black, half white, but looks white, blue eyes, whiter than most white folks, very white. She and I, we kind of grew up together. We raised our children together. So they're first cousins, and it's a wonderful, very, very multicultural family. So we're going in a Safeway one day. And Kathleen, my sister-in-law, is in front of me, and she's, writing a check for her groceries. Now, my daughter, who at the time was 10 years old, was standing with me, and I was directly behind her, getting ready to get my groceries. So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who's a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? Isn't it a nice day today? They're just chatting up. And she says, yeah. So Kathy writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10, notices immediately the difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, and she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point, my daughter looks at me, and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming up in her eye, like, Mommy, you're not gonna let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry black woman, right? And they're gonna be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama. So then I just give her the 2 pieces of ID. I said, some things you gotta choose your battles, right? And then it gets worse. She pulls out the bad check book, right? So this is the book that shows the people who've written bad checks. So she starts searching for my license in the bad checks, at which point it's just out of control now. Just as I'm standing there trying to decide what to do, and it's really deeply humiliating. Now my daughter is in full-blown emotionally upset, who's 10. My sister-in-law walks back over. And she steps in and she says, excuse me, why are you doing this? And the checker goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking her through all of these changes? Why are you doing that? She goes, well, this is our policy. She goes, no, it's not your policy because you didn't do that with me. Oh, well, I know you've been, she goes, no, she's been here for years. I've only lived here for 3 months. And so at this point, the 2 white elderly ladies go, oh, I can't believe what this checker has done with this woman, and it's totally unacceptable. At which point, the manager walks over. So the manager walks over and says, is there a problem here? And then my sister-in-law again responds, she goes, yes, there is a problem here. Here is what happened. So you see, she used her white privilege, and even though Kathleen is half black and half white, she recognizes what that means. And she made the statement. She pointed out the injustice. And she, as a result of that one act, influenced everyone in that space. But what would have happened? I can't know for certain had the black woman said, this is unfair. Why are you doing this to me? Would it have had the same impact? But Kathleen knew that she walked through the world differently than I did. And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
So I want you to just take that in, and we're gonna, I want you to take a couple of breaths. We were gonna put a body break, but I'm gonna keep us moving because, so that we can keep processing what this was, and then we'll have a body break in a minute. So I'd like you to think about the stories that you wrote and what has been presented tonight, all of the content of tonight, including Joy DeGruy's story, and think about what principled empathetic accompaniment looks like. And we're going to brainstorm the attributes of empathetic principled accompaniment. And you can put those in the chat. And Lisa's going to read what you write, and I'm going to record on a Word document and respond to you. So I'm going to share this screen in just a sec. But I want you to think about based on what you've seen and what you've heard and what you know yourself, what would you say are the attributes of principled and empathetic accompaniment.
Humility. Calling out racist behavior. Relationship-based. Listening.
Yeah, listening. Yeah.
Not blaming, questioning. Observing. Courage. Principles. Integrity.
Yeah, integrity.
Permission or consent from the person you're seeking to accompany.
Yeah, really important.
Noticing. Moving beyond your comfort point for someone else. Being mindful of the danger that's present for people of color and not us as white people necessarily. Speaking truth of the incident, not demonizing a person. Witnessing. Taking responsibility. Not worrying about how I look. Stepping into the conflict. Putting their asks ahead of our wants.
Yep.
Understanding context holistically. Putting your body in the game in harm's way if necessary. Within relationship, within community, not a solo contextless intervention.
This is really important that it's within a community, and that, like, obviously in this video, it's really clear that they had a long-term relationship, their family. So really important.
Looking, willing to risk a friendship by calling out racist behavior. Not making the situation more dangerous for Black, Indigenous people of color. Starting from an uncomfortable place, but leaning in anyway. Doing something while the child is there and not waiting till afterwards. Making sure we're listening to the person being affected by the injustice, not just focusing on the other white people. Not trying to look good.
I'm gonna put the one about being willing to risk a friendship. Like, this is something that will happen. Like, this is, as you move into this work, that's doing like calm and strategic interventions with other white people is really important. And this is a manifestation of, as you go into this work more deeply, some people are not going to continue in your lives.
Committing to staying for the whole interaction, right? To see Black, Indigenous people of color through it safely, not just a drop-in. Acknowledgement that inaction in a situation can be equivalent to action that supports whatever's happening. Not expecting gratitude or praise. And there were probably 70 other comments I didn't get a chance to read.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone who's writing in.
Yeah, that's great. The acknowledgement that inaction is equivalent to support, this is really important. Ibram Kendi talks about this a lot. He talks about how that you don't become an anti-racist or a status of being racist. It's all based on your actions. Are you supporting, in any given moment, are you supporting anti-racist policy, or are you upholding racist policy or practice? And so I think that's a really important one. That's a good one to end on. That active anti-racism is something you do moment by moment by moment, and again, you don't arrive there. So that's a really important thing. And we're gonna talk about, as part of your homework, I'm gonna share with you the principles of accompaniment for social change, and you'll have some time to really think about these. These have been developed over time by some people who've been working on accompaniment for a long time. And so that'll be something that we share with you, and then that you look at and think about those principles. But I'll also share with you the list that we just made. Thank you all. Oh, somebody asked, can you define accompaniment? So accompaniment is a really good definition, is kind of what the Christian peacemaker teams do. When I was in Palestine several years ago, we were in Susia, which is in the South Hebron Hills. And there's a village, a whole village that got displaced by the Israelis, so they could put up a historical site. And that village has been destroyed several times in the past few years. They're herder people, they live in tents. The Israelis have piped West Bank water past the village that is their water to a settlement that's up over the hill. And I asked the man who is the principal of the school there, what's the most supportive thing that they received? And he said that when the Christian peacemaker teams come and walk with people and face the injustice that they face every day, and tell people and use some of their platforms to let people know, they say, we speak and we speak a lot, but people don't necessarily hear it. So my definition is really walking side by side. The definition, what do you call it? The etymology of accompaniment is eating bread face to face and sitting and sharing bread face to face. So there's a really important part of mutuality and developing trust that makes it essential. But you'll read more about it when we look at it. But it's really walking side by side in a trusting relationship towards justice, and developing the relationship so that you can do that. And I see more questions, and we're gonna take some time. I think all of us will turn on our videos, and we're gonna take some time to look at your questions and just to respond to some of the things that are coming up for you.
I'd love to, there's been a bunch of questions about what if I was Kathleen and not related to Dr. Joy DeGruy? And I think asking permission is a great and easy thing to do. I live in a very racially diverse neighborhood in Boston, and Boston's incredibly racist, so I get lots of opportunities to practice this. And the other day I was out for a walk, and I watched two black men walking along talking to each other. A white man come up behind them, tap the guy on the shoulder. The white guy had headphones in, asked the black man by shushing his hand to move out of the way so that he could run up and then wait for the light to cross the street. So it was a complete dehumanization. It was totally rude. I saw this, and I went up to the two black men and I said, hi, I just saw that. Sorry it happened. Are you okay if I do a white on white intervention with that guy? And they said, no, we're just gonna let it go. Thanks anyway, it's cool. And later that same week, I was having lunch with a Quaker community, and a white woman told a black woman, like, oh, you're so articulate. And I looked at my black friend and I said, do you want me to do a white on white intervention here? And she goes, oh, please, because I'm tired of this one. And so in both those moments, I could just ask permission. And in one, I didn't have it, so I didn't do anything. And the other, I had express permission to engage with my white friend about why we don't tell black women all the time they're so articulate, or what's the history and baggage behind that. And by asking permission, we're saying, I saw this thing that happened. I don't even have to name it, but it's a way of witnessing and being present with. So I just want to offer that as one strategy to that question of when you don't have that relationship, you can just ask and then respect the answer.
There's a question about the role of white people in community organizing, and how can I walk alongside without being in the spotlight? Milo, at least you want to take it, or?
Go ahead, Mala.
Oh, go ahead, Milo.
You want to go ahead? Okay. I think actually right now we're doing this in South Minneapolis. We've been meeting at a park to have conversations about what it's going to mean for us to live in community with each other. South Minneapolis is like a fairly multiracial space. The two neighborhoods that we've been meeting in do happen to be historically Black neighborhoods. But from my experience is that in that situation is that it is really a thing of listening to the direct asks that are being made by the Black, brown and indigenous people, and specifically in this space, it's Black folks. But listening to their direct asks and then following those. And they have been largely requests about us going back to our own individual blocks and engaging with white folks. And so I think it's like it's a bridge in between, but it's always at like in response to, so like following the direct ask is what I would say. That's helpful.
Mila, if I can put you on the spot again, one of the other questions that came in earlier when you were talking about your resistance to watching Miss Kimberly Jones' video was wanting to know, like, when you feel that, like, I want to fix that, I want it to be different, like, how do you process that so that doesn't become the dominant thing that you're acting on, was a question somebody had posed.
Mm-hmm. I think for me at this point, I think it comes back to what we were talking about 2 weeks ago with the thing of addressing things with critique or curiosity, and of me saying like, oh, I'm noticing this thing. Why am I noticing this thing? And that immediately, like that questioning and not interrogation, but inviting that out allows me to understand what's behind the resistance. And then I can move through that. And I love language. And so for like, that's one of the ways that I'm pretty flexible or practiced in seeing where my resistance or I would say the need to like fix or do those things show up.
And Lucy, one question that came in after your piece, which a lot of people were really appreciating, was somebody said, Lucy, if you're a beginner, what does that make me? And can I ever do enough work? So I'm wondering if
I mean, I think that the invitation, like the beginning, being the beginner mind is part of the practice. And so like the knowing this was a really important process in developing what we were going to do this time, in sort of questioning what we're used to and what we know, what I know to do, and looking at that. And that's the work, and being open to that and being ready for it. And, you know, I had to call Mila and say, whoa, all this resistance is coming up. What do I do with it? And this is what to sort of develop with, oh, this is what I need to say. I need to demonstrate this is a process. And it's, and yeah, I mean, I know a lot more than I used to know, and I can show up in a different way than I used to, but I'm still, that socialization is still in me. And so it takes a lot, watch out for my cat, it takes a lot of like just practice and openness and humanness, and, you know, being willing to be vulnerable over time. So, and I think that feeling of, you know, we're talking about centuries of a harm, of murder and genocide and dispossession, and in the face of that, yeah, you're gonna feel small, but that doesn't mean that your work doesn't matter. And it's really, really important. I mean, I feel more connected to other people, more spiritually present now than I did before. But I feel like that imposter syndrome is going to keep being there. That sense of, wait, I don't know what I thought I knew. And that's where the invitation to keep growing comes from. There's another question that and other people, Mila and Lisa may want to add to that too. So.
No, go ahead. I think let's go 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, there's one from Alma, which I think is really, isn't it better to just be chill? My biggest resistance to this whole process is that I start to question myself in every interaction. It was much easier when I just treated Black, Indigenous, people of color colleagues the same way I treat my white colleagues. There's a lot of complexity in that. So like just being a regular human being is part of what you want to do. But like understanding how different realities are existing side by side, and recognizing and learning and teaching yourself how different those realities, and being able to operate from that understanding is a huge difference. And like Mila and I were talking about, like every time we have an interaction in space, we do that. We do like, wait, did I do this right? And that's part of where the growing comes from. And the paradox is that when we're centered and grounded the way that we're teaching you, you're going to show up in a way that's not as harmful. So taking the time to ground and center is really important, to be chill, but also to know and learn and be receptive to growth is part of it. But I'd love to hear what Mila and Lisa say about this too.
There kind of a follow-up on that thread was a little bit about, I don't want to treat Black, Indigenous, people of color differently because that feels racist. And to me, it's not about, am I treating Black, Indigenous, people of color differently? Is it I treating everybody less white? That because whiteness was constructed as a dominant, oppressive identity, like none of my ancestors were white when they showed up here. They had other ethnicities and cultures and identities that they had to get rid of to be white. That the way that I have been taught to treat people while given validation in mainstream white society is not always very human, right? Avoiding conflict is not a very humane way to be with people, because it says whatever you're dealing with that I find uncomfortable, I don't have to step in with you about. And so for me, it's not that I'm treating Black, Indigenous, people of color differently. It's that I'm trying to unpack all the ways I've learned to be white that separates me from other people and separates me from myself, right? And that gets back to the embodiment piece. That gets back to when I really know myself to be a loving, caring human being, I cannot look at what's going on in the world and say it's okay, right? That is impossible. But there's a part of my whiteness that says, oh, that's just the news. You can push it aside, prioritize your own comfort, let somebody else do the learning for you or teaching for you. And so for me, it's this constant process of like constantly looking at how have I been taught to separate, to collude with, and undoing that learning versus treating any group of people some kind of way.
And Judy says, Black, Indigenous, people of color are around you, are experiencing racism every day, and it's painful. You're not living through what they're living through every day, so you have to treat Black, Indigenous, people of color people differently, acknowledging that reality. So it's 9:28. There's so much great stuff in the chat that we would love to be able to know. Thank you so much for like showing up authentically and saying what you're feeling. So Mila, do you have anything you want to add before we transition to the homework and the small group stuff?
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So real quickly here, we will post the homework, the small group stuff, any slides we used tonight, all the videos we used, everything on the course page tomorrow, so you'll have access to it. The video for tonight will be available on Tuesday. We'll send that to you in an email. It just takes a few days to process. For homework, we're asking you to do 3 things. And again, this will be posted. To really notice where and how resistance is showing up in you as you go through your week. Notice when you are listening to Black, Indigenous, people of color talking, like what is going on in you, not in a judging place, but in an informational and learning place. The second, Lucy's going to share the tenets for accompaniment for social change. And the invitation there is to do some reading, and there's some journaling questions around that. And then the third, because this session is really geared towards how can we as white people really listen to and follow the leadership of Black, Indigenous people of color is to actually do some research if you're not actively already involved in your community in those ways, to find out what is it that Black, Indigenous people of color leadership are asking of the broader community. And to do that by using media sources, not kind of buttonholing an individual to do that telling for you. And then in the small groups, we've put together a bunch of questions that invite space for you to talk about what you've noticed about how resistance shows up and to share strategies for how we process and deal with that resistance so that our behaviors are more in line with our goal and are not just always coming from resistance. And then to share what we've learned within our communities about what leadership of color is asking from us. And then there's also always chance to say, here's a goal that I have in my own growth and how the group can support us. We really see the small groups as a chance for people to process the content, because this webinar is fairly one directional, that the small groups are where you get to talk about things, try on things, get support for things, and help each other step more deeply into the work that we've all collectively committed to here. So Lucy, I think you're going to close us out tonight.
Yeah, we're just going to close with a little bit of silent reflection time, and then it'll seem sudden, but then the webinar will end. And I really appreciate all of you being here, thinking deeply about what we're saying, and participating in the work in between. It's been really great to be with you tonight. So we're going to end with just a moment of silence, and then we'll say goodnight. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.